Hey community, welcome to Behind the Message. We just wrapped up with Dave Ferguson recording the very first week of what we are actually against.
Correct.
It was awesome. If you missed this message, I just want to tell you right now, pause it and go check it out on demand and then come back for this conversation. Dave, in preparing for this, certainly there was like a really long list of things that people might think Christians are against. Is that right?
Yes, I think if people are paying attention to Christians at all, they probably go like, oh, that's the group that's against, and here's the dozen things that come to mind.
Yeah. So you talked about then right off the bat, this idea of that there's a difference between unity and uniformity. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, as somebody was listening to that, trying to think through kind of the difference between the two, what might that look like? Could you give us an example of maybe a topic or a situation or circumstance that we would want to move towards unity and difference versus uniformity?
I mean, one of the best examples, a story that comes to mind for me. I was in Berlin. I walk into this room, and a friend of mine from Norway named Oyvind Auckland. That's a great name, Oyvind Auckland. He had me there to speak, and I walk in the room. There's like approximately like 27 round tables. He said, and what we have is we have leaders from different denominational groups who have all come together to strategize around how they could plant more churches together.
Wow.
And I was like, seriously? He's like, yeah. And then he said, yeah, and in fact, we have, a lot of different denominations who have a lot of different convictions about a lot of different kind of doctrinal issues, and they'd put aside their differences. There was not uniformity at the table.
Yeah.
But there was unity around Jesus and advancing his mission. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the more remarkable things I've seen. It was really, really, really cool.
Yeah,
and so I think that's the difference between that kind of uniformity and unity.
Yeah. Someone that we both know, Carrie Newhoff, talked about in a predominantly Christian culture, we could have all of these different traditions and denominations emerge, really defining themselves on how they were different. And he says in a post-Christian culture, really the only way for us to have any influence with other people is if we could define ourselves by what we're for or how we are on the same team, even though we have differences. And that's kind of what you experienced in that room, is these people that are all playing for the same team. They're all on the team Jesus, but they have different sort of non-essential, different things they believe, but they're saying those are less essential than these kind of core things.
And that was just one example. In this case, they rallied around the cause of church planting. But there's no reason that churches in a community couldn't rally around how do we, increase the social capital? How do we decrease the crime rate? How do we increase the graduation rate? There's lots of those kind of things that different types, different stripes of Christ followers would all be in agreement going, no, this is what Jesus wants. And when we tried to even punctuate that in the message too, the unique thing that I think Jesus offers that no other ideology offers is a vision, a holistic view of human flourishing. Mm-hmm. And I think if we can rally around that, there's things that we certainly should rally around that, and we can unify around that, and that does not mean uniformity.
Yeah. So I don't expect you to look like me, dress like me, vote like me, like the same kind of music or food or something like that. Like, we could have differences.
Like one of us could be a vegetarian.
Totally. And I won't judge you for eating meat, and people think I've lost my mind for not. But
there's not uniformity, but there is unity.
We still have unity. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I know that's a kind of a softball answer, but there's all sorts of ways that we see this play out. You gave us some coaching too in the message about that we should stop judging people. And I know you shared one example of in the grocery store line, how you'll judge somebody.
Or when you're out in traffic too,
That's my worst.
Okay, yeah, you judge other people, but you give yourself permission because you have a very good reason. Yeah.
Oh, sure. What would you say then to somebody, what is practical coaching? Somebody, maybe they're on their phone reading the news or looking on social media or outside in the lawn having a conversation with a neighbor, and they can feel that kind of judgment start to rise up in them. What's practical coaching for how we could really be intentional to try to stop judging so much?
We've had conversations about this, but we do, our brains are wired in such a way that we create stories. We tell stories when we're in certain situations, and it may be with family, it may be with friends, it may be in the grocery store, it may be in traffic. We tell ourselves a story, a narrative about what is happening here.
Yeah.
And usually the narrative is pretty consistent about how they're bad and we're good, how they're wrong and we're right, how they don't get it, and man, why can't people think and act more like me? I think it's entirely possible, though, to begin to tell yourself a story that actually assumes the best of other people. Mm-hmm. That I think assumes, in some ways, you know what? I bet that person has an emergency, and that's why they're in such a hurry.
Yeah.
I bet that person. Well, I don't know what would be a good reason for having 12 items in a 10-item lane, but
They really needed to get home, or yeah.
But I think there is a way to begin to really kind of assume the best of someone and really kind of suspend judgment. And if you can begin to train yourself to do that, to stop before you start down the path of that storytelling that you do, and to suspend judgment and then assume the best, what you'll find over time is that also can become a pattern.
Sure.
And I'll tell you what, the more you're able to do that, it's a better place for you to live. I mean, it's a nicer place for other people to be with you, but it's just a better place for you to live.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll find yourself a lot less angry. You'll find yourself having a lot less anxiety when you begin to, suspend judgment and assume the best.
Yeah, I just think like agreement is probably the cheapest form of unity we could ever aim for, right? We're only going to be unified if we actually agree or think the same way. Like that's just such a cheap version of it versus working through differences.
And somewhat less interesting.
Oh, sure.
Because you kind of know what the other person is going to say because you're exactly on the same page.
Yeah. We are also, though, drawn to people that think like us or perceive the world like us. So there's some intentionality you have to have, I think, about having a bigger circle.
Why do you think we're drawn to people who think like us, look like us?
I think we are like creatures that seek out comfort. And so that's probably a more comfortable way to live, with no conflict about what you view on the news or what's happening in the economy or how you're going to vote or what you think about
Don't you think
text,
you can also live in the same way you can rewire your brain to when you see people who believe different, look different, think different, act different, to go like, wow, I bet there's some great stories here.
Yeah.
I bet there's something interesting here that I wouldn't get anywhere else. I bet this is a person that could stretch me and grow me. I mean, I think that's true.
Yeah. But there's so much, I think it's totally true, and that's even my own experience in life, but there's a lot of differentiation that has to happen to be
What
curious.
do you mean differentiation?
To be able to view myself as my own person with my own experiences and beliefs and ideas, that doesn't mean they're right or wrong. For me to have space for your experiences, ideas, beliefs, that might be really different from mine. Like that, I think for some people that just becomes almost shattering, right? To encounter somebody who thinks differently or believes differently, or
because it's threatening.
Sure, in some way, yeah, it's threatening to something in them.
Or maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe I'm.
Yeah, and then I think you start unraveling those things. Okay, this is my last question,
Yes.
but I think it's maybe a really important one. As a church, we've chosen to talk about this right now. What is on the line? Like, what would you say is the reason this is so important for us to talk about what we're actually against and maybe what we're for throughout the series?
There is a genuine hunger, longing, desire that's probably was placed there from the beginning by God for something to bring people together. I think people really, really want that. Unfortunately, I think the church is not probably their first option, their first go-to when they're in looking for that, but they're really, really, really looking for that. Yeah. And I think Jesus offers us it. I mean, one of the things we didn't get in the message too is we talk sometimes about John 17, Jesus' last prayer. We talk about it as the great collaboration. And we have the Great Commission to go, the Great Commandment to love, but I think one of the really important strategic parts of the Jesus mission is that third go. Go and collaborate, the great collaboration. And I think people are longing for it. I think we have it to offer them, but I think we sometimes haven't done a good job.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me what's your thoughts on that though? Because sometimes you ask me questions that you know the better answer.
I don't know if I know the better answer. I might have a different answer, which is really what we're trying to do.
I bet it's better. Let's hear it.
I lose sleep at night over kind of the witness of the church in the West right now. I think there's lots of things that have contributed to kind of where we are, but even like people in my neighborhood know I'm a pastor, and kind of the taste in their mouth about church or Christians, I think is probably pretty far removed from the witness of Jesus. And so I just see that there's so much opportunity for us to move towards Christ-likeness. And like people see this disagreement and know us for what we're against, like why would they ever want to be a part of something like that, right? why would they even imagine that they would be accepted or belong if they don't believe like we do yet? And so I just think there's tremendous opportunity right now for us to incarnate the ways of Christ, embody the ways of God's kingdom, and this feels like such a critical part to us figuring that out.
Imagine, is this the right word, the dissonance? Is that the right
Like
word?
cognitive dissonance?
Maybe that it would
Let me see where you're
create,
going. Yeah.
okay, it would create in someone when they showed up in those spaces.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Because all of a sudden they show up at a serving event that looks like that. They show up at a worship service
It's
that looks like that.
what is this?
Right.
Yeah.
Because there would be no expectation of that.
Totally. And you think about right now, just sort of in the world, like the bifurcation between men and women, what we're seeing when it comes to challenges with racism, what with socioeconomic class kind of getting further and further, like there is no other place than the church to really lean into that. And I think the mutuality that we can model with ethnic difference, with gender difference, it's repairing something that's broken in the world, and people are really drawn to want to be a part of that kind of like life-giving, redemptive community.
I mean, our intention at Community is we want it to be a space for that, where men and women get to lead together, where there's people of every color, and we still got a lot of room to grow on that.
Color, age, socioeconomic
All the whole thing, yeah.
class.
We want to be that kind of a place, that kind of a space, that kind of a community.
And that feels like heaven on earth. Like
Yeah.
that's God's intention for what the church is meant to be.
And I think if people see it, then there'll be something intuitive, like, wow, there's something here that I've been missing.
Yeah, it's good. So we're against leaving people out of that.
Yes, we're
That's
against
what
divisiveness.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us for Behind the Message, Dave. Thanks for that. Super fun. We will see you back here soon. You could head to communitychristian.info for any information or to take a next step with us here at Community.
You do?
I might have some
gotta go to
avocado
Aldi right now.
smoothie if you want
Avocado
some
smoothie?
but, it's exceptional.
I mean, I like guac.
Avocado smoothie? You like guac, but you wouldn't drink it through a straw.
No.
I think
Absolutely
that's a
not.
good stance. I think we are actually against drinking guacamole through
Yeah.
straws.